Okay, so I already told you a little bit about me. If you guys are interested in seeing any of my photography, the best place to go is just thomasaaron.com. Um, who is this webinar for? You know, it'll be interesting to see who all shows up. Michael Rhino, who's in here, is a very accomplished landscape photographer. So he's a good photographer. Then I'm sure we have people in here who don't use anything but their cell phone. And so this webinar is really meant to show some basic concepts that would be useful to pretty much anyone. If you use a cell phone, hey Mark, how you doing? If you just use a cell phone for your photography, guaranteed the principles that we're going to cover will make your pictures better. If you're a professional photographer or a accomplished photographer in some other niche, and you're just wanting to learn a little bit more about taking pictures of dogs, hopefully you will pick up a couple of little tips. But it's basically for everyone. Hopefully everybody gets something out of it. What gear do you need? So for the most part, not completely, but for the most part, this webinar is equipment agnostic. Whether you have a cell phone or a high-end professional camera or anything in between, these principles should help you. That said, there's nothing wrong with having really good gear. We'll talk more about gear a little bit later. It's the last thing I cover because in my mind, it's kind of the least important. It is important, but it's the least important. Will I cover advanced concepts? Yes, I will. For most of this webinar, I will not cover very advanced concepts. If you hang around to the end and you have questions that sort of go into the more advanced concepts, I will certainly answer those for you as best I can. If you have questions, just put them in the chat, and I will kind of go back to the chat and look at them at some point and answer any questions that you have. All right. So the first tip that I have for you is this, and I want to point this out, that literally, if you don't know a lot about photography, if you use any one of these tips, it's going to help your pictures just be better, right? And there's several tips in here, so if you use them all, your pictures should be way better. When you're using a camera, you have a small rectangular frame that you're looking through, and that needs to tell a story, right? It needs to express to the viewer what you see when you look at your dog or look at a dog. So let's look at some examples of how the frame tells a story or limits a story. This picture right here, if you look at this picture, what is that picture about? What's the story being told? Now, I would say there's not a lot of story being told here, but if you look in the dog's face, you can see this sort of look of determination, right? This picture tells you something about the character of the dog or the energy level of the dog. So it does tell a story. But let me show you another picture of the exact same dog. Now what's the story, right? The story's changed. So now the story is about this dog running around in a field with this other dog. You can see some of the flowers. You can sort of pick up a little bit more of the background. You can kind of see what's going on. So it tells a little bit more about the story. So whenever you're framing a picture up, you don't want to just point and shoot. You want to take just a moment, if you can, and sort of calculate what it is you're trying to accomplish. Are you trying to convey something about the dog? Are you trying to convey something about what the dog's doing? Something about the dog in this particular environment? Something about the dog with this other dog? Something about the dog with this particular human? What's the story you're trying to tell? That's very important to give that. If you just give that the tiniest amount of thought, your pictures are going to improve. This picture here, this is a this picture has a concept in it that I actually really like. it tells a story as well. And, you know, I'm asking, you don't have to answer, but I'm asking you, like, what story do you see being told? So obviously there's a dog here with a ball in his mouth, but if you look at him, he's looking off to the side, real intent. And it's pretty obvious that there's a part of this story that's implied. You can't see it, but you know there's most likely a person there playing with this dog, right? So here's a dog in interaction with its owner. You don't see the owner, but sometimes the implication of the story can be caught in the frame and not necessarily shown in the frame. So you kind of have to give some thought to the story you're telling. One of the things I recommend is take a lot of shots and then get rid of all the junk. But if you do that, you have if you're sort of a beginner at it, you have a better chance of getting something really good. One other thing I want you to notice is very few of my pictures are centered. The one on the left is kind of centered. The one on the right is not centered. This one is not centered. Okay. And I don't like to center images in general. It's a little boring. So you notice I leave a little space to the left of this dog. Why? Well, because that dog's looking towards something on the left, right? So you want to leave a little space there. If it's just centered, it just tends to be kind of boring. So there's a lot of complex rules to composing a photograph, and I'm not going to go into all those. But if you just kind of look at where the dog's going, where the dog's looking, and leave a little space on that side of the dog when you frame up your shot, it just makes for a more interesting, compelling picture, in my opinion. Get this out of the way. Okay, so what's the story being told in this shot? Now, I've got to be honest here. This is a composite. This is two separate shots put together. Okay, there's a shot of a dog, and I put out a video somewhere about this picture, but the dog's jumping over this contraption I made, and so I took the picture. Then I took a picture of the fence from approximately the same angle, and I composited them together. But this is a shot that I had in my mind that tells a story, and I had to find a way to create that story without teaching my dog to jump fences. Okay. And so, like, what is the story here? What do you see in this picture, right? There's obviously some kind of rural farm-like place with, horse fences and a dog jumping over a fence with a retrieving dummy in its mouth. There's something about hunting, rural life, that kind of thing, right? So this picture was made to tell a story, and that's kind of what you want to go for. If you're going to take pictures of dogs, find ways to tell a story with it, okay? Or consider what story your pictures are telling. So if you have questions, put them in the chat. Just a little reminder. The next thing is this. This is similar to if you were taking portraits of a small child. If you're taking pictures of a small child, you're not going to typically stand over the child and take pictures. You're going to want to get down on the child's level, right? Get down in the child's world. That's where you're going to get the nicest looking pictures. And it's the same way with dogs. So if you look, this is the kind of thing you want to do sparingly. I never tell people, don't do this, don't do that, don't center your picture, don't take a picture from above the dog. There are no rules really in photography, photographic composition. There's principles, and it's generally a bad principle to shoot down on a dog like this. However, maybe this tells a story, right? Maybe it has something to do with the dog's eyes. Or maybe it has something to do with the dog looking up at the owner for further instruction, whatever. Sometimes shooting from on high is okay, but in general, I recommend you do that very sparingly. And like this shot, this picture here is getting a shot of this dog rolling in the grass. And I can tell you, from having processed this picture, it really didn't turn out to be a very nice picture. I didn't care for it. it would have been better. I don't know if can you guys see my cursor on the screen? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It's showing up. Yeah.
Okay. So like if I were over here shooting this way towards the dog, something like that from a low angle, that would have been a much better shot. But this kind of shot rarely, in my opinion, works out. It usually just doesn't work out well. Do this frequently. Okay. So here's a little puppy, picture of a puppy I took on the beach. And you notice when you get down, I laid down for this picture, right? I'm laying on my stomach in the beach about 10 feet from this dog. And I snapped this picture, but this gives you a feel for what the world's like from the dog's perspective, right? You're bringing yourself down into the dog's world, and it just makes for a so much more expressive shot. So I highly recommend that. Don't be afraid to squat down, to sit on the ground, to lay down, do whatever you need to do to get these kinds of shots. And here's another one. This is interesting story behind this dog. This dog's name is Shelly. Both of these dogs right here were taken on a beach in Sicily, and both of them were strays. This one, I don't know whatever happened to this one. This one, I ended up helping this one get adopted by a Sicilian friend of mine. But you can kind of see something about this dog's life, right? This picture tells a story, right? It's a dog, laying in the sand all over its face, sand up its nose. Not necessarily the most beautiful shot, but this is this dog just killing time on the beach, right? Not connected to any people, just watching people watching us in a longing sort of way. You can't really catch that. You can't get that sort of a feel if you're standing high and shooting down on this dog. So highly recommend that you get down on the dog's level for these types of shots. So here's an example. Here's a dog. Here's that little dog I was shooting earlier, right? I'm squatting down for this particular shot. Right? I don't want to be shooting this from on high, or it would just look weird. And here I wanted to get a shot of this German short hair, so I sort of kneel down and get it, right? So I think that makes the point. So here's a real good example of two shots of the same dog, one from on high and one from down at the dog's level. So basically you want to do less of this. Now, see, I look at this picture. This is my dog. I think this dog's beautiful. I love this dog so much. And when I look at it, I see the dog that I love. But you look at it, and it's just a boring shot of a dog, right? There's nothing really to it that is exemplary or overly interesting. Well, here's a shot of the same dog from down on the dog's level. She's just laying, chilling on the carpet. And if you notice on the picture on the right, you sort of pick up on the dog's soul almost, right? Or the dog's spirit, right? The dog's personality. You see it from down low. You don't really feel it when you're shooting down on top of the dog's head. So get down on the dog's level to shoot. Very, very important principle. If we've got some new people that have popped in here. If you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat and I will get to them in a bit. Okay, third principle. So when I'm taking pictures of dogs, what I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to capture the personality of the dog, right? I'm trying to capture the things about the dog that the owners, that's unique to the dogs, that the owners know about. The owners will see these things and they'll be like, wow, yeah, that's my dog, all right. That's the kind of thing you want to get. So a couple of interesting things. Does your dog do this? Okay, I mean, that's kind of a weird shot, right? But it's interesting. It's interesting. My dog does that, right? So it's interesting to me. And when I show it to you, you're like, oh, wow. Yeah, you might think that's gross or you might think that's weird, but that's my dog and it's interesting, right? So things that your dog does that you notice that sort of reveal your dog's personality, character, whatever, snap those. That's what other people are going to be interested in seeing. Other people aren't going to want to see the photo roll on your phone with 10,000 boring pictures of your dog. They want to see kind of interesting stuff. To you, every picture of your dog's beautiful, like every picture of your child is beautiful, right? But it's not beautiful to everybody else, right? So you want to capture the interesting stuff. Does your dog do this? Does your dog retrieve, right? If your dog retrieves, that's kind of cool. Not all dogs retrieve. Not all dogs do it with intensity. If your dog's an intense retriever, get a picture of that. Does your dog catch a Frisbee? That's kind of cool. Not all dogs do that. So try to find the things that are unique and interesting about your dog. One of the things I like about dog photography is the same thing that I like about macro photography. So macro photography is where you're taking really close-up pictures of really small things. There are things that you don't really see with your naked eye easily, right? Like when you get a macro picture of a dragonfly, for instance, you look at that and you're like, whoa, that's beautiful. I've never seen anything quite like that before. But it's only because somebody took the time to draw it in real close. With dogs, they're a large animal, so you don't really take macro shots of them. But what really is interesting about dog photography is capturing action shots of dogs, because when dogs are in action, when they're doing what dogs do, you see interesting things about them, like when this dog's barking on the left, right? You wouldn't catch that saliva there unless you had taken an action picture. It happens so fast, you don't have time to really examine it with your naked eye. If you look at the look on this dog's face when he's retrieving, the sheer intensity of it, right? You don't see that when he's moving at you at 20 miles an hour. But when you stop it with a camera, all of a sudden it becomes very beautiful. And so this dog catching a Frisbee, check out the look in his eyes. Look at the joy on his owner's face, right? That all happened in a split second, right? That's not something you can stop and stare at. It's just a brief snap in history, right? And you capture it and you get to see that. And that's very, very attractive to me. Or this dog shaking water off, right? I've seen dogs with a lot cooler looks on their faces than this when they're shaking water off, but you can't see a dog's face when it's shaking water off. It's moving so fast. You don't really see anything. You're too busy covering your face to not get splashed. Well, you want to, if you can freeze that with a high shutter speed, you can see some pretty amazing things. So find interesting things about your dogs. There's interesting characteristics that your dogs exhibit. And then there's interesting things that you don't necessarily catch with your naked eye unless you freeze the dog in action. So those are really the two categories of interesting things that I've had the most success at, frequently capturing. Here's a good one. So this little dog, we went out and took some pictures of it. And, let's look at the picture on the left first. This dog pounces, right? It's just like pouncing at bugs, and it just pounces. It's like Tigger the tiger. And that's very interesting when you catch the dog. Look at the concentration while it's trying to capture a bug, right? That's kind of cool. That's kind of cool. And you don't really, you can sort of see with your naked eye. But if that's like a behavior that your dog does regularly, catch it. Ask yourself, what behaviors does my dog do regularly that I think are cool? Get pictures of that. That's what's cool. Now, this picture on the right, this is not something that you see with your naked eye. Believe it or not, this dog grabs a stick and he flails and throws himself around and jumps and acts like a little psycho. And yet, when you capture that in action, you end up with these really, this really cool expression on his face. It kind of looks like he's hula dancing with a stick in his mouth. It looks like a little Bigfoot, something like that. I mean, you can look at it how you want, but this is another example of capturing something interesting about your dog while it's in motion, right? Stuff that you don't really catch with your naked eye. That dog's never going to pose looking like that. You got to just take pictures while the dog's in activity, in some fun activity. Just start snapping pictures. If we have anybody new in here, if you have questions, you can just type them in the chat and I will try to get to them a little bit later. The fourth thing, we're moving pretty quickly here. Let's see. The fourth thing is capturing the dog-human bond. This is really important because it is to me, because my business, my life for the past more than a decade has been about creating a bond, the correct bond between dog and human. It's all been about that. That has been the story of my life. I'm trying to figure out how to move this thing and I can't. Hold on. So my life has been about helping people to create this bond. And then later, my life sort of morphed into photographing this bond, recording this bond, so I can explain it to people, so I can explore it. And so whether you're taking a picture of your own dog or someone else's dog, the question becomes, in what special way does your dog interact with you? Or what special way does somebody else's dog interact with them? Take this picture, for example. What's the story that's being told here about this dog and its interaction with its human, right? You see the dog looking to this human, tuned into this human. This dog wants to know what's coming next from its human, right? That's a very powerful statement about the dependence, the psychological connection between a dog and its human. That's worth gold, right? I mean, how many pictures on your cell phone do you have of your dog interacting with you, right? That's what's recording that special bond, not just these pictures that you snap of your dog, but can you get pictures of, or give your phone to somebody else and have them say, hey, when my dog does this, snap a picture. But not only can we capture pictures of the dog's psychological connection to humans, but we can capture pictures of the human psychological connection to dogs. For example, this picture shows the dependence of the human on this dog and the dog on the human. In my opinion, this is a beautiful, beautiful picture, right? Like, it could be the most lousy processed picture in the world, but the story this tells about this dog and this human says volumes, right? It's been captured in this rectangular frame. And so this is the other thing I'd recommend you do is capture pictures of your dog with people, of people with their dogs, that sort of thing, or have somebody take pictures of you. If this is a hard kind of thing to take pictures of yourself. Yeah, you can do it, but you have to set up a camera on a tripod with a timer and, or have some sort of a remote trigger, and all that stuff is doable. Sometimes it's better just to get somebody else to take the picture for you, but this is powerful, right? So anyway, moving on. Now, this is one I'm kind of particular about. Where you focus your camera is important. And this is actually, I find, easier to do with a cell phone than it is to do with a professional camera. A cell phone camera has enough depth of field, meaning enough of the picture is in focus, that you can get the eyes in focus and the nose be in focus. With a professional camera, you've got to adjust the aperture in your depth of field to get this. I'm going to talk more about this, but let's look at an example of what I'm talking about. Okay, so here's a good picture from a focus perspective. If you notice, the dog's nose is in focus and the dog's eyes are in focus. This is important. When we're taking pictures of a human face, we typically just focus on the eye, and our nose is so close to our face that the nose is usually in focus too. And usually with like a wide open aperture, which means you have a very narrow depth of field, if you're taking a picture of a person, their eyes and nose will usually be in focus, but when you get back around their ears, you'll start to see it blur up just a little bit, which is fine. We don't care about somebody's ears. But with a dog, their nose is part of their face and their nose is a long ways from their eyes. So you have to make sure that your depth of field is deep enough. So with a cell phone camera, this usually works out because they typically have a really deep depth of field. With a professional camera, you need a higher aperture. So at the very end of this, I'm going to talk about what aperture settings I use for those who are using a non-cell phone camera. Here's another one if you look. So the dog's nose is in focus. The eyes are in focus, right? So I used a pretty deep depth of field on this. For those of you who use more of a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, something like that, I think this was like an f7. And if I can get my thing out of there. So there's another one, eyes in focus, nose in focus. The nose is part of the dog's face. Now, I have seen a ton of pictures online where the eyes are in focus and the nose is blurry, or the nose is in focus and the eyes are soft or kind of, barely out of focus. An idea, back to this picture, if you look at this picture, the eyes are fairly sharp, but if you look at the nose, the focus starts to get really soft. Now, I did this with a camera, not with a cell phone. If I would have done this with a cell phone, the nose probably would have been in focus too. I would just want to put the focus bracket on the cell phone, maybe right here, or maybe even on the eyes, and you're going to get a lot better picture. But I actually don't like this. I feel like unless the story that you're trying to tell is the dog has something to do with some unique feature of the dog's eyes, or the story you have to tell is all about the dog's nose, unless you fall into one of those two categories, you want both in focus. So this is what I would call a mediocre picture. If I were to look at this on somebody's cell phone, I'd be like, yep, nice eyes, face is out of focus, right? Okay, so now I'm going to look and see. I've got some bonus tips for you, but before I go to those, I'm going to just see if there's any questions. All right. So this is something that has occurred to me. Here's where this occurred to me. I have a relative who is big into dog rescues, and she has fostered so many dogs, dozens and dozens of dogs. And she was over at my house one time, and she was showing me all these pictures of the dogs that she fosters, and she's just going through them on their phone, and I'm like fighting the urge to hold back a yawn. But she was so enamored with each of these dogs. She loved them. She loved those dogs. It's simple as that. You can't demean that, but the pictures were horrible. But she looks at those pictures and she's like, this is a dog that I loved and I invested myself in and I helped. And I this picture means something to her, right? But to me, it means nothing. It's just a boring picture of a dog shot from on high. But she sees something different in it. Not everyone feels the connection with your dog that you do. You see your dog's beauty in every picture, but everyone else wants to see something interesting. So I would even go so far, though, as to say that if you take the time to frame up your pictures well and get nice shots that tell a story, those pictures will mean far more to you than the countless snapshots that you take with your phone. They just mean more because they tell a story. They'll bring to your mind a story, a characteristic of the dog that's important to you, rather than just being a bunch of random pictures of your dog. So just something to remember. And again, it's similar to the way people feel about pictures of their children, right? It's like everybody thinks every picture of their child is, or vacation pictures. Hey, do you want to look at all my vacation pictures? No, not really. I don't. But to you, they mean a ton, right? They're precious memories to you, but to everybody else, they're dreadful. So if you want to take pictures that other people will find interesting, these tips, framing things up, that sort of thing, telling a story, that's going to go much, much further. And again, I think you'll enjoy the pictures more too. Don't worry too much about gear unless your current gear will not do what you need it to do. Now, here's the thing. Cell phone cameras have come so far that they're pretty amazing, and what they lack in camera quality, they make up for in what's called computational photography, computational processing. So like I could take a picture of your face, open my aperture up real wide, and your face would be in focus, but everything behind you would be sort of blurred out, and it'd make you pop. Well, a cell phone can't do that. The laws of physics prevent the cell phone from being able to do that, but you can flip your cell phone over to portrait mode and do the same thing computationally. So you can get really, really close. For most people, you can get really close to doing with a cell phone what you could with a better camera, but there are some exceptions. It's unlikely that you're going to get the shutter speed out of a cell phone camera to get really good action shots of your dog. There are some apps that allow you to adjust it, but I have found them not to be fantastic, but they're better than using apps that don't allow you to set it. So explore your apps on your cell phone to get better shutter speed, better low light performance. There's apps that help you take better pictures in low light without the pictures being grainy. But if you're not a professional photographer, there's no need for you to go out and spend thousands of dollars on an expensive camera until you explore the apps that are available to you, and that sort of thing. And you figure out, what, I can't do with this camera what I need to. And I've been there. Like I had a Canon 5D Mark III, and I used it for a lot of years. And it finally got to the point where I just really couldn't get the caliber of action shots with it that I wanted. So I had to upgrade to a better camera. And it's just a better camera. But not everybody finds themselves in that spot, right? You can do a lot with what you have. Just explore the apps. And I'll make this invitation open. If anybody has any questions, if you can email me, you say, hey, Tom, I'm trying to get this picture of my dog doing this or that, and I'm using my iPhone 10 and having trouble with it. I take a lot of pictures with my cell phone too. And so I know some of the apps, some of the stuff like that. So I might be able to point you in the right direction, but try to do what you can with what you got. There's no need spending a ton of money on something if you're not going to be doing an awful lot of it. Did it again, trying to get my picture over. So process your images nicely, but don't over process them. Processing is usually not a fix for a bad picture. If you've taken a lousy picture, don't waste a lot of time with the various editing apps on your cell phone trying to fix it, or don't waste a lot of time in Photoshop trying to fix it. If it's a bad picture, it's a bad picture. Go take another one. But with processing, you can definitely enhance your pictures. You can add a little bit of saturation, take away a little bit, bring out the shadows, make them, show more detail, bring the highlights down so the picture is not too glaring, adjust the contrast. A lot of things you can do, a lot of filters you can use. And, none of that's off limits. It's not up to anybody to tell you what looks good to you. If it looks good to you, go for it. That's what I do. If I like the way something looks, I stick with it. But I would urge you to take the time to try to do as good of a job as you possibly can in camera before you start trying to process and fix a bunch of flaws in the picture, because rarely, it's just obvious. If you have a bad picture and you do a ton of editing to it, people are going to look at it and go, wow, yeah, looks like you've done a ton of editing to that. So work on your camera skill a little bit is really what it comes down to. Another thing I'd like to throw into this is something I don't do it in as disciplined a way as what I once promised myself I would, but I'm always doing YouTube searches for how to do this or how to do something else, right? How to take a shot against a black backdrop, how to make a vignette around your picture. There's all kinds of things. Try to learn to do, if you're really interested in taking a bunch of nice pictures of your dog, try to figure out how to do one new thing a week in your editing software. So if it's Lightroom or Photoshop or anything like that, or some editing app on your cell phone, there's YouTube videos on it, almost guaranteed. So try to learn something new, right? And apply it and play with it. If you have the tools, if you think of each little thing you learn to do as like a paintbrush in a painter's arsenal, or every little thing's like another paintbrush, right? It's just a tool that you can use to take what you have in your mind and pull it out of that picture. So, learn things, right? This is a little bit, two people have their pictures turned off, or their video turned off, so I can't see a show of hands unless they want to turn that on. But I'm curious, who here is primarily shooting pictures of their dog with a cell phone versus using an actual handheld camera of some kind or other? Their cell phone? Are you using a cell phone, Brenda? You're using a camera? What kind of camera?
I have a Canon mirrorless RP.
You have an RP? Okay. RP's a good little camera. I have an R I use as well. RPs are good. Real good cameras.
Yeah. That's good. And I'm just really getting into doing pet photography as a hobby. Okay. And I had asked a question that this addresses it right here. I had asked a question about minimum shutter speed for fast moving or for dogs that are action chucks.
So what I'm going to talk to you about in a second with this next point will apply directly to your RP.
Okay.
It'll straight up apply to your RP.
Okay.
RP is capable of really, really good action shots. Carrie, is there any way you can unmute at least and tell me what are you using to shoot pictures?
I am taking pictures of foster dogs generally.
Okay.
And I don't feel like I can capture anything special about them.
Okay.
So that's kind of why I was interested in just getting some general tips to understand how I do that better.
Okay, I'm gonna tack on a piece here in a minute about doing pictures of foster dogs that might help you. And
thank you.
Jillian, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name there or not right or not, and I feel bad about it because I know that you're a client of mine, but I have a hard time with it. How do you pronounce it?
It's Gillen.
Okay, all right. What are you shooting with?
Yeah, I'm just using my cell phone.
Okay.
I'm not doing any special fancy pictures. I'm just totally in love with my dog and I want to catch her doing everything. So.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. All right. So, this fourth point is going to be aimed more at people that are using a camera, not a cell phone camera, but like a point and shoot or a camera that gives you some control over your settings. So whenever you're shooting a still image of your dog, Brenda, so now a cell phone's going to do this automatically, but you're going to want to set your shutter speed to about 1/60th of a second for a still dog, right? That's going to take care of any camera shake that you have while you're holding the camera in your hand. That 1/60th of a second is usually fast enough that you can get a crisp image, okay, of a still dog. Now, if your dog is moving, depending on the speed of the dog, if it's sort of a slow trot or a slow dog, I typically shoot at about 1/1000th of a second. If it is a fast dog, like I've got a picture of a greyhound. If you go to thomasaaron.com and look in the gallery, there's a picture of this greyhound. This dog's running 35 miles an hour. So I took a picture of him at 1/2500th of a second. Okay. And that's what it took to freeze him. So for moving dogs, you want to be between 1/1000th and 1/2500th of a second. So here's what I would recommend for you. Your Canon EOS RP has very good low light performance. That means the ISO, if you're shooting in the dark, let's see, I think that's my next question. Actually, I'm going to put all these in together. So if you're shooting in, here's how you want to set up your RP. Here's how I would set it up. This is the way I set up my camera. I shoot a Canon 1DX Mark III. Here's a picture of it.
Gotcha.
It's a beast, right?
Right.
But I would set your RP up the exact same way.
Okay.
So here's the way I would set it up. I would set it in manual mode.
Yeah, I shoot in manual all the time.
I would put your ISO on auto.
Okay.
I would set your aperture to somewhere between, if you're using a zoom lens, if the lens is not zoomed in, if you're an aperture of f5.6 should work about fine for you. If you're zoomed in, you're going to have to increase that.
Right.
So if you zoom in, I'd be using an aperture of about f7, 7.1, something like that. So you set your aperture, set your ISO on auto, set your aperture to between f5.6 and f7.1, and then worry about your shutter speed.
Right.
If your dog's moving, just set your shutter speed to where you want it. And so your ISO might get pretty high. Like it might get up as much as like ISO 3000.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you sacrifice ISO.
Yes,
shutter speed.
You sacrifice it because number one, nobody gives a hoot about it. Nobody's going to look at your picture and go, oh, wow, you used a high ISO. Nobody cares. The other thing, though, is that the EOS RP is a very new camera, and its low light performance, ISO 3000, 3500 is nothing for that camera. You will not see significant graininess. Right. So if you're shooting in daylight, especially, these settings right here will just rock on that camera.
Okay, great. That's awesome.
Okay. And for you guys shooting cell phones, there's an app if you're shooting here's what I would recommend. There's an app, I think it's called Camera Plus for iPhone. It's called Camera Plus, and it allows you to set the shutter speed. So if you're going to take action, if you're going to shoot still shots, it doesn't matter. Just use your regular old camera app, frame your picture up to tell your story, take your shot, and you're good. If you're going to do action shots, you want to download Camera Plus, where you can get you can experiment with higher shutter speeds on it. So shutter speeds of 1/1000th to 1/2500th. So that way you have a better chance of landing a good action shot with it. Okay. So that is really the end of this presentation. We did pretty good. We're right at like 50 minutes. Let me get out of screen sharing here. Give me just a quick second. Let me see if there's any more questions. Tips for lighting a black dog. So Brenda, okay, so here's when I'm lighting, okay, are you shooting in a studio?
I have a home studio that I use.
Is that a softbox I see behind me? Okay,
yeah, I got a couple of soft boxes, and then I have a speed light as well if I need it. If I'm shooting outdoors, I tend to use reflectors to try and reflect light back up into the dog's face, because that's generally where it just becomes a black ball.
Right. So I do a lot of lighting in the studio environment. When I'm outside with the dog, I very rarely use any lights. And it's the only time I typically use lights outside is if I'm using a speed light to flash to get a catch light in the dog's eyes.
Right. Oh, okay. Catch light. Yeah.
But that's it. The rest of it, you can usually adjust it in Photoshop, and you can create light for the most part. It's hard to light a moving dog.
Right.
But what I do is, if you're shooting in manual, you got to be careful, because your camera is going to select what it thinks is the correct exposure for the scene. So one thing you might want to look at is put your camera on spot metering. There's a setting in there for spot metering.
Yep.
And meter on that dog's fur, and that should lighten that black fur up.
Okay.
The other thing you can do is, if you're shooting in manual, is go ahead and set your ISO rather than put it on auto. So set it to, like if you're outside, set it to ISO 100, and keep your aperture and shutter speed on manual, where you're adjusting them. And the RP is a mirrorless camera, so you can look through the viewfinder and adjust your aperture, your exposure, and see the change that you're going to get. And so just adjust. If you're shooting in manual, adjust for the dog's fur, right? Okay. All photography is a balance. It's going to be real hard to get a shot where the dog's fur is perfect, a black dog's fur is perfect, and so is the background.
Gotcha.
Right? Everything is a compromise with photography. So, but yeah, you just adjust for the dog's fur. Either you spot metering and let the camera do it, or you manually do it looking through your viewfinder. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Yep. We should get together. Are you here in Denver, Brenda?
I'm in Texas.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, we should chat more. If you
love that.
Yeah, if you ever have any questions or something.
I've got lots of questions.
Okay. I wanted to go real quick to the I want to show you guys. Let me think of where to find this picture.
Actually, I have one quick question for you. Do you use strobe, or do you use continuous light in the studio? I was worried about strobe scaring the dogs.
Yes, I don't use strobes. I've seen dogs where if you flash them,
they freak out.
They shut down.
Yeah.
Continuous lighting is better.
That's what I got.
Yeah, it's not doing anything scary. So I use continuous lighting. Again, I'll use speed lights outside, but that doesn't seem to bother dogs as bad. But you know, anytime you put a dog in a new environment, a studio or something, and you go flashing them, you're running a risk of that was your only shot. Hope you got it.
Exactly. Exactly. That's what I thought. Okay. Thank you.
I've got a picture of a shelter dog.
Yeah, I've been doing some volunteer work at the shelter as well for their website, taking pictures and stuff for them to put on their website.
Okay, I know where this picture is. Let me pull up a picture for you guys. Give me just a second. The dog's name was Grayson. Okay, I found exactly what I need. Hold on one second. Okay, let me put you guys on screen share, because I want to show you something I did with a shelter dog. And this helped this dog to get adopted. And this was done in a studio, Brenda. So, okay, that's Grayson.
Aww.
That is the picture right there that the shelter was using to try to adopt him out. So I saw that picture, and I showed that picture to a friend of mine, and my friend goes, "Man, I feel bad for that dog, but I would not let it in my house." Okay. So I took the dog in the studio. We cleaned him up, found out that he liked treats, and we got this picture.
Oh,
and how long? And how long do you think it took him to get adopted?
Hours, maybe days.
Right. So with studio dog, let's go back and talk about shelter dogs and taking pictures of them.
Mm-hmm.
Your job with a shelter dog is to get a picture of that dog in its best light, right? Or get an attractive picture of it. Mm-hmm. Those attractive pictures are gonna, by nature, they're gonna show the dog's personality. They're gonna show a nice side of the dog's personality. So you want to get a shelter dog somewhere where it's comfortable, whether that's in a house or whether that's outdoors, even if it's on a leash or a long lead, and get down on the dog's level. Mm-hmm. Get the dog doing something, right? Make noises with your mouth. Get the dog to look at you and cock its head. Mm-hmm. Hold up a treat. Get the dog excited. Then take those pictures, right? Get it out of the shelter environment, clean it up, and get those kinds of pictures, right? Anything you can do to get the dog to perk up. If you can just get him to perk up with a squeaky toy, mm-hmm. or I go like that with my mouth, or a treat or anything. When that dog perks up, get that picture. So here's your process. Get it out of the shelter, mm-hmm. brush it out a little bit, go somewhere where you have a nice background, outdoors, indoors, I don't care, but as long as it is an attractive background, then do something to get the dog to perk up and pay attention and snap that picture. That alone will completely change the way that dog looks and the way people perceive it. So that's what I've done in the past for shelter dogs. I've done quite a few of them. I don't do as many nowadays, but that's a good thing to do. That is a good way to build your portfolio. That's a good mm-hmm. way to gain experience, because it's really low pressure experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And nobody's paying you a lot of money for it. So if you mess it up,
nothing at all.
But yeah. What other questions do we have? Any more?